Hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in this meeting. My name is Francisca Blanc. I'm the Advocacy and Outreach Coordinator with Utah Housing Coalition. I would like to welcome the panelists today, and we will start with our State Senator, Jake Anderegg.
Thank you very much, Francisca. I guess I'm being asked to give an update as to the efforts of the Utah Housing Affordability Commission, the status and things that we're going to be working on moving forward for this year. First and foremost, it is important that I set everybody's expectations on the funding that we got for Senate Bill 39 is very much potentially gone. We are working through budgetary issues right now, and to what level we ultimately, through the executive appropriations process, have to cut into base budgets. So let me just say, each year you've got your base budget component, then you've got your what we call building blocks. That's new money for new growth. All that new money, which is where the 10 million came for Senate Bill 39, all that new money, gone, in theory, gone. Then we're looking at putting cuts into the base budget that we had beginning January 25th of this year. So what that means is, as we go through this process leading up to the special session that we are planning for on the 18th and 19th of June, we'll have very good numbers starting June 15th that will help us understand just how deep the cuts have to go. Now, that being said, we started from the premise that all of those building blocks, all of the new funding that came from bills that were funded during the general session, we started from the premise that those were all off the table, that all the funding for that was gone. That does not necessarily mean that it is gone. It just means that we're going to cut this versus that potentially. So there is, I believe, some value in members of the Housing Coalition to begin in earnest reaching out to members of the Executive Appropriations Committee and start lobbying them, start helping them understand how vital this is. I'll tell you that that is what Education and HHS did. Those two committees basically got very little cuts. I think Social Services, HHS, they didn't get any cuts that I'm aware of. Some of that is because of the obligations we have for Medicaid and whatnot. So there's some factors there that kind of exempt them in certain aspects. But then in the education spending, what we're looking at right now is less than 1% cut. Now, education is different because it's siloed, and we get that. But a lot of the other subcommittees, like IGG, the Infrastructure and General Government Appropriations Subcommittee, they're having a 13.6% cut. So to kind of put that into perspective, so the first thing I want to say today is that the money is in jeopardy, and we will have to work hard to try to preserve all of it or some of it. And it really is going to be just a conscious decision on the part of the legislature to cut this versus that, to cut existing budgetary aspects versus these new budgetary aspects that we funded during the last session. But outside of that whole doom and gloom cloud that hangs over our head, which is the results and the outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic, we do have, I think, a lot on the table that we are discussing and moving forward with the commission. And the commission's efforts really are, I think, going to be focusing on aspects of how do we help and focus this year's policy on that lowest level of the area median income spectrum, including rental assistance, including aspects of permanent assisted housing, transitional housing, maybe resurrecting the whole concept of McKinney-Vento for rental assistance for primary aged kids, which I find very interesting because, you know, during the session, that was one of the $5 million chunks we were trying to get, and the House put up a stink, and so we couldn't get the money. Well, now with these cuts, and David Spatafor, I think you know this, or if not, this may be news to you, House and Senate leadership are now eyeing, with this budget deal, taking $70 million from the Unclaimed Properties Fund to help balance our budget. So, okay, it is what it is. You just need to know that that's the discussion that we're having right now. So I think that there's a lot we can discuss on policy. There's a lot that we can continue to move forward on, but in my opinion, the effort for the next 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on this special session and the next special session, is really, let's call out the dogs and let's go hunting and get the House and Senate leadership and executive approach to try to hold harmless their commitment and the legislature's commitment for the $10 million. I think those are going to be our biggest aspects of what we're going to focus on for the next month or so. But I do know that working with Jonathan Hardy and others, we are going to tee up a lot of these other discussions and bring in the experts for these other subject matters. We have a whole list. I don't have them in front of me, so I can't remember exactly what's on there. Jonathan might be able to help share with what those lists are. The commission is going over, so when it's his turn, we can have him kind of, you know, fill in my laps. But that's what we're looking at right now. In general, budget is really what I've been focused on for the last 45 days, and it's going to continue to be that way for another 2 to 4 weeks at least. And we're likely going to have budgetary issues heading forward into late summer and early fall. So I hope that that's kind of a good encapsulation of what you were looking for me to update on, and I'm open for any questions if you have them, if that's appropriate. If not, that's fine, but I'll turn the time back over to you unless someone has more questions for me.
Thank you so much, Senator. Actually, we do have a question from the Housing Coalition. So we have the $20 million that was set aside for rental assistance post August 1st from the COVID-19 money. And can we get some of those funds beyond the 20 million? I guess the question is, can we get more than 20 million?
Can we? Sure, it's in the realm of possibilities. Is it likely? No, but it is certain. It's definitely something we could fight for. I mean, that you just got to keep in mind that when you're really trying to set up a voucher/rental assistance program, primarily, you're looking to get ongoing funding sources for that. And the COVID-19 CARES Act money is only one-time money. So even if we get 20 million or 30 million or whatnot, that's great, and it will help us for 12 months or so. Past that, it's gone. So it's a Band-Aid approach to a much bigger wound, and we've got to figure out better funding sources for that. So yeah, it's worth maybe fighting for it, but I mean, my personal feeling is, do we fight for that, or do we fight for preserving the 10 million that we were able to get with the passage of that bill? I'm good with what the group and everybody wants to go for, but for me, my primary focus is focusing on preserving the 10 million. So
right. Do any of the panelists have questions for Senator Anderegg? I guess no. The only last thing I will say, Senator, Utah Housing Coalition has been communicating with our congressional delegation in support of the HEROES Act, which is now in the Senate. And if the commission put a statement out in support of the HEROES Act to our senators, that will be incredible. I would like to thank you for your service, and thank you for being part of this webinar with our members. Our next speakers are Ashley Spadafor and Dave Spadafor, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Francisca, thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity of participating today. Ashley and I are, and I'll let Ashley do her introduction. We are and have been serving as the facilitators of an affordable housing work group, probably for the last, I think, 2 years now. We represent a half a dozen or so cities in Salt Lake County, Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, Mill Creek, Holiday, Midvale, and South Jordan. And a number of those cities, all of those cities are very interested in affordable housing. And a couple of those, Salt Lake, Mill Creek, South Salt Lake, Midvale, have really focused on affordable housing. And so we've used that position to work with the facilitating our work group. I have been a registered lobbyist ever since we've had to register. I've gone through 46 sessions, working for a lot of municipal cities, the Utah League of Cities and Towns for a number of years. And since the 2003 session, having a private sector business focusing on municipal issues, construction, housing, the like. Ashley, talk about yourself for a sec.
Thank you for having us here. Dave gave a pretty good intro, and we're a team on this, and what we'll do is we'll just kind of go over, we've been working with a lot of different groups and coordinating very closely with the commission. And what we did is we working on that, we do legislative meetings during the session, and then now after the session, we've been meeting once a month, and we basically come up with a whole list of suggested items and potential prioritization of items that the commission can look at this session or this interim. So I'll let Dave go through that.
Thank you, Ashley. And as at our last housing meeting that we had during the month of May, and in preparation for the Commission on Housing Affordability, we made a presentation to that commission based on these priorities. And first, let me just say this. Senator Anderegg has been great to work with. He and Representative Val Potter from Cache County are the chairs of that commission. Representative Joel Briscoe also sits on that commission, and the three legislators have done a very great job in trying to focus on what we need to do. As we look at this session, we've produced a one-pager of highlight of issues that we want to work on between now and 2021 and beyond. But we have focused on 5 priorities that we would like to share today, Francisca, with your members, if that's okay. The first 2 priorities deal with funding. And Senator Anderegg talked a little bit about both of those, and Francisca had one of them in one of her questions. Our 2 top priorities, the first one is any sort of housing funding that we have available due to COVID-19. And Francisca talked about the $20 million that'll be available come August 1. We want to make sure that any federal funds that have gone to the state or to local governments, either Salt Lake County, Utah County, Salt Lake City, or the rest of the state through the legislature, to make sure that that funding is available for COVID-19 related housing issues, whether it's rental assistance or whatever the case may be. That's our number 1 priority. And we're working with the various governmental entities on that issue. The second priority is to maintain and program the $10 million that we successfully were able to get through the 2020 legislative session. Senator Anderegg spoke about that, and it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain that $10 million. $5 million of that for Olene Walker on new housing, build new housing, and the second $5 million on preservation. We have spoken with the chairs of social services, the subcommittee that deals with that funding, and neither one want to give that money up. However, that may be a reality that we're going to have to face when it gets to executive appropriations. But those are our top 2 priorities. Our third priority, as we look at going into 2021, would be building. And the legislature is, you know, our builders, quite frankly, and we want them to look at permanent supportive housing and shared housing and SROs. And that will be our focus on in terms of asking for money to build. Senator Andreg, it's interesting. He brought up the money coming from the unclaimed property fund. The legislature ought to look at that unclaimed property fund and the realization and call it the Spatafor fund, because we're the ones who found that last summer and started to work on that for McKinney-Vento rental assistance. And there is a considerable amount of money in that fund, but that really ought to be used specifically, not to balance the budget, but how to deal with specific needs like McKinney-Vento rental assistance. Our fourth priority would be to continue to research and educate on the efficiencies and needs of types of specific targeted population rental assistance, whether it's McKinney-Vento children, whether it's flexible housing funds to assist domestic violence survivors in retaining safe and stable housing, our seniors, and also our immigrants and refugee population, to make sure that they have the ability to get safe and sufficient housing. And then our fifth priority is fair and equitable landlord-tenant law reform. That's going to take a while, but we also believe that that's an absolutely critical issue. So I'll leave those priorities there. Ask Ashley for her views on that, and then we can open it up to questions, Francisco.
No, that's it. Dave did a really great job. The only a couple of things I wanted to highlight is in that first one, when we talked about utilizing current COVID dollars, I think the other thing that's really necessary is diagramming and understanding where all the money is coming from and where it's going, and then potentially identifying where the cracks are, because I think it's really, that's going to be necessary. And to Dave's final point on fair and equitable landlord and tenant law, really being fair and equitable on both sides and understanding and looking at all of the issues. But I think that's really, if we come to a situation where there's not going to be additional money and we need to look at some housing policy shifts, that is a really great place to start in a year that we might not have a lot of money. So with that, if there's any questions, or let us know, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ashley and Dave, for the great work that you both have been doing, and the working group became bigger and bigger, and we have a lot of very good professionals and people who work in a different area of housing working on this committee, and so we are very grateful to you both. We have a lot of people from the rural area who registered for this webinar, and specifically a lot of people from USDA. Are we looking at all at the rural housing?
That actually, that was also on our list. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And is what we did. Again, this is just a beginning list, and so we just roughly put address rural affordable housing and needs and solutions. And again, it's general, because all of these are very general. But I think as we look at all of these different issues, there's a difference between urban and rural, and the rural needs are very different. And so that is on there. And I think when we, Michelle Weaver's been great on kind of articulating some of the needs. And so specifically, we need to look at very specific issues for rural as well. So yes, thank you.
And to add to that with what Ashley said, Francisca, we would encourage all of the folks from Rural Utah USD who you work with to provide to you any specifics in rural Utah that they would like to see addressed, because I think that would be absolutely critical. The more information we get, the better opportunity we have of passing that along and working with our legislators on it.
Thank you so much. And I will, kind of repeat what you said. People who are watching now on YouTube, and if you represent the rural area, please, get in touch with me or Tara, and we will be happy to send your referrals to Ashley and Dave. Thank you both again. Our next speaker is Lanny from Salt Lake City, and I would let her fully introduce herself because I do not want to butcher her name. Lonnie, you're on.
You said the first name right. That's
Well,
better
that's
than
easy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lonnie Egertson Goff, and I'm the Director for Housing and Neighborhood Development at Salt Lake City. And I'm just realizing my background is very revealing. I apologize. I'm working from my she shed, as my husband and son have deemed it. And I'm really focused on working with our community partners and very closely with county, state, and other partners that we typically work with. And I'm learning some of the new things that are available. We've been really blessed with HUD technical advisory assistance because Salt Lake City has such a high count at the point in time count for homelessness. We were given that technical or TA through the ESG COVID HUD process. So if it's okay, I'm going to try and share my screen. I am a novice at this. So, oh, it says, Francesca, that you've disabled the participant screen share. Is there a way to unravel that or no?
Okay. It got fixed.
Okay, I'll try again. Is that visible to folks?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to just caveat that this these numbers change every day, it feels like, and especially now that Senator Andrig was the wet blanket saying that funding that we anticipated would be available in that realm may not be. But this is focused on Salt Lake City funding. And like I said, these numbers are being updated as we learn new things. That number, 12.88 million, is really big, or it feels really big. But there are many different timelines that the monies are potentially available. So most of you probably know that Salt Lake City is a HUD entitlement city, and that we receive CDBG, ESG, home, and HOPWA funds. So for those that don't have those acronyms memorized, Community Development Block Grant, Emergency Solutions Grant, the Home Grant. I always get that acronym wrong, so I'll just say that's for affordable housing development. And then HOPWA is housing options for persons with AIDS. So those funds have been appropriated by our city council and will be available to the partners that have applied for and are ready to implement those funds July 1st. If I go around the little honeycomb, Funding Our Future is a sales tax initiative that city council and community approved starting in 2018. We still have a little bit of funding left from the 18-19 fiscal year and from 19-20, and then we anticipate 3.4 million focused on housing. That is also going to be available after July 1. Moving around the honeycomb to the HUD CV, those funds are we're still learning about the parameters that we will be able to put those funds out to the community. Catherine Fife and others know that we've been trying to get our hands around what I think Ashley's terminology, diagramming it out so that we know where the gaps or cracks are. We're doing work every day with webinars and other mechanisms to collaborate. And we as a city are still trying to wrap our heads around how the COVID related funding will be implemented. But we hope that we'll have a lot more clarity on that in the next week or two and know when that funding will actually be available. I just realized this housing trust fund, Honeycomb, that funding source was recommended or asked for by the mayor with hand identifying potential community partners to do rental assistance, mortgage assistance. I'll go to the next slide here and just show that, hopefully. This is a more of a looking at a timeline. So refocusing on that one-time money, we proposed it, the mayor proposed it to council coming out of our housing trust fund, which is allowed by our city ordinance to help with special needs housing, which we feel like the COVID response is a very appropriate potential use for those funds. The council decided to preserve those funds for housing development for deeply affordable projects, and have provided a source just one time through our general fund for $750,000 for rental assistance, $250,000 for mortgage assistance, and then $100,000 for rapid rehousing. That was just approved last night, so we are still in the throes of preparing agreements, working with our community partners on implementing those funds. I feel like that's a lot of information, and again, these are the things that we're working on actively. If there are other things that folks on the meeting or the webinar would like to have me talk about, I'm happy to, or answer any questions.
Ronnie, thank you so much for your presentation. Are there any current contracts in place right now with the agencies?
So on the Funding Our Future dollars, so if you'd like, I can put that back up if that would be helpful to speak to it.
It's okay. I mean, we are just basically wondering what's the time frame for getting the money into the hands of renters?
Sure. So the HUD funding, our typical HUD funding, those agreements are being processed right now, so that on July 1st, you know, our partners that are, you know, ready to do it are able to go for it. We hope that the one-time funding that I just mentioned for rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and rapid rehousing could be available as early as the 15th of June. So the rental assistance we anticipate would be implemented by Utah Community Action, Asian Association, and Catholic Community Services, always with the point of 211 being the mechanism for people to access, you know, information about how they can receive those funds or be part of the programs. So that's our plan for those immediate dollars. And then, like I said, we're still trying to figure out on the HUD CV funds, when we get those, how we're going to, our mayor has asked us to do a very expedited competitive application process. So that will be something that we'll publicize as soon as we're ready to do that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I have one more question. Do you know if these funds are able to pay back rent?
We have not gotten into that level of weeds with our community partners, but I will write that down to make sure that we at least talk with our partners on that. Thank you. There's so many layers.
That will be very important because we don't know how many renters signed the rent deferral form. So we are assuming we're gonna see some things happening this month. So we are paying close attention to it. And we have one more question for you. Actually, no. So thank you so much, Lani. I really appreciate your presentation. Our next speaker, you're welcome. Our next speaker actually will be two speakers. We have Catherine Fife. from Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness. And we also have Rob Wiseman, who is actually the executive director of NAMI Utah, but he sits on the board of Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness. Welcome you both.
Thank you. We're just going to be brief in terms of some of the impacts of current funding shortfalls and talk a little bit about, what could potentially happen if there were additional cuts moving forward. And so as we've evaluated the existing funding for some of the housing programs, case management programs, those kinds of things, what we've determined thus far is we're looking at a loss of about 156 beds for chronically homeless individuals. We're also looking at a loss of 14 beds for young men at one of the programs here in the Salt Lake Valley, as well as 34 case management positions look like they're going to be lost as well. And if you think about each case manager works with, 10, 20, sometimes 30 individuals, this is a pretty significant impact to how we are providing housing assistance to people in the community. And that's as it stands right now. I know we're looking at potential cuts moving forward. Now, I think I heard some good news from Senator Anderegg about limited cuts to the HHS budget, but that remains to be seen. I mean, we're not done yet. There's a special session, it sounds like, in a couple of weeks. And so, we're working with agencies as part of the coalition to see what we can do to help mitigate some of these losses. It's also encouraging to hear what the city is attempting to do in terms of, rental assistance and stabilization and those kinds of pieces. So, there are things on the horizon that we're watching carefully because, we may be at a loss in terms of being able to provide housing assistance to folks. So that's just a small piece, and I can turn it over to Catherine for some additional information.
Rob, I have a question. My apologies, Catherine. Rob, do you know what's the total dollar amount for these losses?
Oh, goodness gracious. Let me take a look at my sheet here. I have it on another sheet. I don't know the total deficit that we're looking at this point. And actually, Jonathan may be able to speak a little bit to that. I'm not positive. Catherine may even have some additional information on that, but I don't have that at the moment.
Thank you, Rob.
Actually, a little bit towards that, we are working to understand the impacts of the state funding as well as other funding around housing in our community, and have been meeting with those who received funding from the state for housing projects, as well as our partners to look at the gap and what the needs are, and what other funding is supporting housing efforts in our community. So we've been meeting regularly over the last several weeks. We're meeting again on Thursday to have a better idea of what those gaps are in funding for housing. And that's, of course, not taking into any consideration any additional cuts that could be received with state funding. So just to kind of follow up on that comment as well. And I just wanted to say from, the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness has really been working hard to bring folks together to talk about all sorts of issues around homelessness, including housing, but also other issues that impact housing and homelessness, which is really something that we're all involved with right now, which is the COVID-19 response. So this COVID-19 pandemic has really shown us that in order to be healthy, housing is a key component to that. So it really does impact homelessness, and making sure that individuals are housed and are safe and are healthy is really important. And that is going to be the work moving forward with the coalition and our partners, really working closely with the city and the state and other funders to make sure that as we are living with COVID-19, we know that the #1 best protector is housing, because when you have a congregate setting, when you're in a shelter, when you're in places where you can't socially distance, you're more at risk for complications related to a COVID-19 positive test. We have, for the last 12 weeks, been working with our homeless service providers to both create emergency response plans for COVID-19, to protect those who are experiencing homelessness. And now we are working towards what we're calling the new normal, making sure that we're still able to effectively house and connect individuals experiencing homelessness with resources, but to do so with COVID-19 strategies and implications in mind. And so I just wanted to point out one really effective strategy that we've been able to deploy with our partners, and that has been our Stay Home, Stay Safe Vulnerable Populations Hotel program. Early on, through guidance from the CDC and the Salt Lake County Health Department, we learned that individuals who are over the age of 60 are those with underlying health conditions were most vulnerable to get complications with COVID-19. And so we worked with service providers, with our homeless resource center operators. And also I just want to give a shout out to David Litvak in Salt Lake City, because we have been working arm in arm here with the Salt Lake County Emergency Command Center to develop these strategies and implement them. And what we came up with was a program. We rented out an entire hotel, and we worked with partners to get referrals for those who are the most vulnerable among our most vulnerable. And we have been able to successfully protect just under 200 individuals who are over the age of 60 and or have underlying health conditions. And we have really shown that that is effective. And when we are able to give an individual housing, it is really paramount to their health. And we have also been really successful just in the short time with that program to be able to connect individuals with more permanent housing, because we know this is a temporary protective measure. To date, we have really been working on focusing some housing strategies with those who are in this vulnerable populations hotel, and have successfully housed 9 individuals so far. And we'll be, as we are evolving in our COVID-19 response as a community, be working through our coordinated entry system, our service providers, our housing funders, to make sure that we are prioritizing the right folks to get into housing moving forward. So to date, we have 9 individuals who've been housed through that program, and a really a great population to help make sure that they are protected long-term from COVID-19 as well as otherwise. So with that, I'm happy to talk more about our collective COVID-19 response, but it couldn't be done without our stakeholders and our partners. And it is really related to housing. So I really appreciate this conversation and all of the work that is done by all of you who are on the panel, as well as the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness. With that, Francisca, is there anything else you'd like us to cover, or questions we can answer?
I don't have any more questions. If any of the panelists have questions, you can ask them now. Anyone watching on YouTube, you can post your questions on the video page, and we can try to answer them later. Again, thank you so much, Rob and Catherine. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our next panelist is Jonathan Hardy with the state.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting this call. It's good to hear from everybody and see everybody's faces that we work with so often. I've been asked to talk a little bit about unemployment insurance and also our rental assistance program that we have offered out there. And we know that the main consumer resource during this pandemic for people who have lost income is unemployment insurance. So let me give a couple updates on where we're at. We basically have 100,000 people filing or close there to weekly claims for unemployment. And to date, over this, since March 15th to May 23rd, which is our last measurement on this, we have paid out almost $460 million in benefits of unemployment. That includes all the CARES Act enhancements to unemployment insurance. So really a lot of dollars out the door, which is supporting a lot of folks right now from an income perspective to help take care of their bills, including their housing costs. So our goal and objective, even when we talk about the rental assistance program, is to get as many people connected to that safety net as possible, especially while there's enhancements through the end of July with the unemployment insurance program. So that's a couple things on unemployment insurance. Let me talk a little bit about our rental assistance program, which we have statewide. If you see me looking up on the screen, it's because I'm looking at the screen above my camera. We have had over 1,000 calls of folks interested in the rental assistance program throughout our, I believe we have 11 agencies out there processing applications. And most folks that are calling are already connected to unemployment insurance. So they're already getting those benefits that are helping them cover their housing costs, are not eligible for a lot of the rental assistance programs we have out there. So we do have, we've issued just a little over $24,000 in assistance so far, not a ton yet. But we know that sometimes there's a lag in getting all the documentation put together to get that assistance. We haven't seen a real spike, or we haven't heard a lot of spikes in evictions or other types of adverse housing things for consumers compared to what we would typically see in a normal year, not in a COVID year. So we think most of the housing needs are being taken care of right now between unemployment insurance and our rental assistance program. We know that that is not an indefinite future for housing crises. So we are keeping an eye on it. CARES Act funding for unemployment insurance will be ending towards the end of July. So we'll have a whole new environment in August. It's unclear how much economic activity we'll have back then, if people will be fully back to work, working and getting income as they received before, all those jobs come back. So we've got obviously our program in place right now, which is about a $4 million program. And then we have a $20 million program that will likely come on or before August 1st, depending on what happens with the legislature, to help supplement other rental assistance needs. And that program will be, that $20 million will be really tailored to the environment at hand. Right now, we're really focused on getting people connected to unemployment insurance. And if you get denied, or if you're kind of in process, that's who the rental assistance program is geared to help right now. But that may be a different population come August 1. So we're keeping our eye closely on that, and we'll be responding to needs. We have weekly calls with our grantees just to make sure that we're problem solving any situations that come up. So far, pretty stable, but that doesn't mean it won't be a different story here in a month or two.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. We know how busy you guys have been in the past month, or maybe always, but thank you so much for sharing with us this information, and also sharing information on your website that we forward to our members. Our next panelist is Matthew Weinstein. He is with Voices for Utah Children, and he is one of our dear colleagues that we spent quite a bit of time at the Capitol during the legislative session. So Matthew, you're on.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks very much for having me. I'm gonna turn on the screen sharing so that I can just run through a few slides very quickly about the state budget situation, because obviously that's very much front of mind these days. So at the EAC meeting that took place on May 13th, EAC got revenue estimates that were pretty dire, that essentially said that the state budget is going to take a hit in the general fund and education fund of about $2 billion over the next few years. And based on that, they came up with revenue shortfall estimates that were roughly between $800 million and $2 billion, midpoint of about $1.5 billion. And they're expecting they'll get new economic forecasts and more precise revenue estimates later this month, in the next week or two. But it is important to note that the economic forecast from April that was based on was actually assuming that Utah's economy is going to take a much worse hit than the national economy, about 40% worse this year. And in fact, what we've seen is that our hit has been a lot lighter, as bad as it's been. And our April unemployment rate was 9.7%, which is even above where we were at the worst of the Great Recession. That was actually 6th lowest in the nation, and only about 2/3 of the national unemployment rate. And a lot of that is because of our success dealing with the pandemic. We have the 5th lowest death rate in the nation. So that indicates that when they release the updated economic forecast and the updated revenue estimates in the next week or two, we're expecting that combined deficit for FY20 and 21 will be about half what they were expecting, somewhere more between $500 million and $1 billion. And so then the question is, well, how are they going to fill that gap? And that's where the other document that they presented to EAC on May 13th looked at the state's budget reserves, which add up to a total of $5.4 billion. They've already taken $500 million of that and converted cash allocations into bonding, and that was in the easy category. They divided it into 4 categories: the easier to access, 1.7 billion, and then more difficult categories as you move down, and that added up to $5.4 billion. And so in our minds, that raised the question, we're also getting some federal aid, although at this point it's not very flexible, but we're hoping that there may be additional changes. But as we all followed the last week, the appropriation subcommittees proposed up to $723 million of cuts from the FY21 budget, in addition to eliminating a similar amount that was added at the end of the 2020 legislative session. And so they're expecting to take those lists and come up with recommendations in the next couple of weeks from EAC that will then go to a special session that could be on June 18th or thereabouts. There's also, of course, the option of revenue enhancements, which relates to the overall question of Utah's tax burden, which has been generally falling since the 1980s. We're now at an overall level of taxation that's about where we were around 1970. So that's sort of the context in which we're operating. And so this is what led to the op-ed that I had in the Tribune yesterday that was raising this question of, do we really need to make budget cuts at all if we end up with a budget gap for FY 2021 combined of between $500 million and $1 billion, and we have $5.4 billion of reserves? We could use a 1/5 of that and still have 80% left over. And so that's an important question that the legislative leadership is going to be grappling with over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Matthew. That was the end of your presentation.
Yes.
Thank you so much. At the beginning of our meeting, we had Senator Jake Anderegg, and we talked specifically about the $10 million allocated SB 39. He did encourage us to advocate for that money with the leadership and the executive appropriations committee, because it's just one of those things. It's not over until it's over. So, you know, we need to be aware of it, that if we cannot get 10 million, maybe half of it, something, whatever we can preserve from the original allocation of $10 million for affordable housing. We had one more speaker invited, Jeff Daybell. He is with Access to Justice, a Utah State Bar. I have not heard from him, and I'm assuming he's busy at the courthouse because it's a Wednesday, and that's the busiest day for them. I have one last question for Jonathan Hardy. Jonathan, if you're still there, if people are having problems with their rental assistance programs, who should they call? He might be away from his computer, which is totally understandable because we all do that. So it's 10 minutes to the hour, and the panelists did an excellent job in giving us an update. Thank you so much for anyone who watched on YouTube. And of course, this was a live Zoom webinar, and the video will stay on our YouTube channel afterwards for people who can watch it later. Thank you so much again, everybody, and thank you for the great work that you do in our community. And of course, one last thing is we have to do self-care. It's crucial for our work. We are living in very stressful times, very difficult times for our country. And we always have to remember to take care of ourselves so we can do the work that we do on behalf of our community. Thank you again, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.